Good evening and happy Sunday, all four of you. Hope that you're all doing well. And if you tuned in recently, you would have seen this coming soon. Father Eric has something nice to say about an article in America Magazine. For those of you who don't know, America Magazine is a Jesuit publication. It's got a bit of a reputation for representing the progressive wing of the Catholic Church in America. And so I don't often read it, but there is um, a rather interesting, what is it, uh, news aggregate called newadvent.org. And I saw the author before I saw the place of publication. I know that the author had published some insightful pieces before. And so that's how I ended up reading something from America Magazine. The title of the article is the Synod ignoring the concerns of most Catholics in the pews? Answer is yes. But anyway, and this particular line right here really struck me. Increasingly, I find Catholics, both lapsed and practicing, listening to Joel Olstein, Reverend Paula White, and other evangelical personalities. As a friend of mine noted, Joel Olstein will tell you that God does care that you can't pay your mortgage, that your child is doing drugs, that your spouse is cheating on you, that God really cares about your sufferings. By contrast, I rarely hear in a Catholic homily that God cares about the details of my life. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. That's really interesting. I don't have any attraction whatsoever to Joel Osteen, Paula White's, those sorts of characters. I don't get the appeal. But if that is, let's say, the first time you hear that, the first time you hear that the creator of the universe is actually concerned about the details of your life, I could see why you would want to be buying on to that, why you would want that to be a part of your life. And it's actually, and I just realized it like this morning, it's astonishingly close to the truth. Because by the time, let's say that um, you can't pay your mortgage, your child is doing drugs, your spouse is cheating on you, that you've faced some kind of catastrophe. By the time you've gotten into the middle of that, you are already confronting the cross. You are already bearing the cross, right? Just like Jesus promised that you would. Um, but I think where they go wrong, where these prosperity gospel teachers are wrong, is in saying that God's love for you manifests by just taking these crosses away, and that what you have to do is increase your faith by claiming, um, God's love, God's faith, claiming the promises that you've made, and that's where they go wrong. And so it's Joel Olstein and the prosperity evangelists. Um, they won't have you drink the whole chalice of suffering. They'll have you stop halfway. They won't drink it down to the dregs. But it's only when you go all the way down, when you go all the way down with Christ to the bottom, that the resurrection can actually manifest itself. And so I just found this an interesting insight. The power of the prosperity gospel is that it acknowledges the cross, but tells you to put it down early. I wish that Pia de Soleni would come hear me preach, because I feel like I do nothing but preach on the cross sometimes. But honestly, it comes up all over the place and I can't stop reading it. So that's what I see in scripture. And that is what I tend to preach on. So the prosperity gospel acknowledges the cross, and that's good, but it tells you to put it down early. That's not so good. So, anyway, that's what I have. I have something nice to say about an article from the National Catholic Reporter. I have lots of nice things to say about Ted. How are you doing?
No, my goodness, Father, that was great. I loved what you were saying. You know, Wow. Yeah, that was just good. That was really great. It was actually, I mean, there's a bunch of personal stuff that was like timely within like 3 hours of timely that I'm not going to share on the internet. But I really appreciated that. But also, like, look, having the humility to recognize that someone like Joel Osteen, who tends to be just this like punching bag, is like that there's something going on there.
Because otherwise, nobody would listen to him.
Yeah. Yes. This is, I remember one of my favorite Peterson moments is when he's like, everyone turns up their nose at Harry Potter and they think there's nothing there. And he's like, why is it that like every child is just like fascinated by Harry Potter? Like clearly something is going on there. It's like, does that mean it's good? Not necessarily. Does that mean there's something true being said? I mean, almost certainly. And so look, the way I think one way you could talk about that is what Joel Osteen is saying, and those other prosperity gospel preachers are saying, is they're preaching shalom, they're preaching life, right? Life and life abundant. They're just not raising it to the right level, right? They just need to go up another level or two, because if you go, and this is a lot of what Pageau was getting at the Chino conference, actually, which religious snobbery is real. And this is why St. Augustine says that humility is the gateway to all the virtues, which I've been on that train for like 4 months now, and I have no intention of getting off of it. But right, it's like okay, so we want life. We want life. What's the place that we could get to where when your mortgage isn't paid and your kids are doing drugs and your wife is cheating on you, or you're being dragged through the streets before you're disemboweled? Because that is like a category of human experience. What's the place that you need to be in where you can still have life in that? So I really like that, Father. I think because this notion of, well, okay, so this really ties in with the stuff that I was talking about with Nate and Sherry on Dante yesterday, which is that there's something about the prosperity gospel preachers that actually really values humans, right? They're saying, look, like you should have a life that is full of goodness and abundance and glory. Really, I think that's what they're saying. I think that, again, it's just all too low of a level, right? I mean, Andrew in the comments says Joel Osteen told me that God wants me to be rich. He does. It's just material richness is not the goal. It's other kinds of richness. It's the kind of richness that doesn't fade. It's actually, material riches are they're transient and dangerous. And so, but they are still good. Material riches are still good. They're just transient and dangerous goods. But there's eternal goods that you can turn to that no one can take from you. Yeah. So
I want to respond to something that Chad says here. I think they are often seemingly too afraid to have a simple conversation with someone suffering in abundance. They can't bear to sit with them. And no joke, that was my number one fear in seminary. That when I was in seminary, my number one fear was, how do I deal with somebody who's suffering? And I went through my entire time in seminary not knowing how I would do it. And I was a deacon. I was on the path to ordination, and we get a pastoral counseling class. And they talk about motivational interviewing, open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summarizing. Basically, just a framework and maybe even a technique for listening to somebody really well and showing them that you're paying attention to them. And I was like, oh, geez, I can do that. And when I've been with somebody who's suffering, I just ask them questions and let them do all the talking. And not only do they walk away, as far as I can tell, comforted and strengthened by that, but I find it actually moves me to it. Like it's a transformative experience for me too, where I'm actually able to connect with somebody on a real intimate level, sometimes very quickly. So yeah, I guess Joel Osteen just needs to get a pastoral counseling class at the St. Paul Seminary with Mr. Dan Stockman Masters in Social Work, because that was really helpful for me, right?
There may be a few other steps in the process, Father.
Sure, right. Because you also need Deacon Nigerian to come up and explain Colossians 1:24 to you.
Yeah.
Mark, he's saying that we're dealing with a flat world. Materialism is flattening, compression, reduction. So, like, if you're a materialist, then the only kind of life there is life on this earth. So obviously, that's where God's going to be blessing you.
So, Mark, you're going to love this. In purgatory, in Purgatorio, the people who paid too much attention to earthly matters, like of wealth. So all the punishments in hell are related to the sin. In purgatory, all of the penance, all the purgatorial suffering is also related to, let's say, the thing that kept someone from loving God as much as they could have. And so these men, the souls of these men and women, they're staked to the ground face down, right? Their arms are tied out and they're staked so that they can only look at the ground, because they can't look up at heaven. And so you're right, this notion of like flat worldview, like they're literally like their worldview is compressed to 2 dimensions because they didn't look up to spiritual things. They were just concerned with material matters. Yeah. And so what they get is they don't get to look up at heaven. They don't get to look up into the vast volume of reality, right? Mm-hmm. Because reality is volumetric rather than flat. And so
they just need to look at the dirt, because that's where all of their loves are going to end up someday.
Yes.
Going to end up just being dirt.
Yes.
And, that's the brilliant thing about the Purgatorio is, the penances that people are assigned are designed to elicit desire for heavenly things.
Yes, that's so right. There's this beautiful cry that I think Dante makes, where he's saying, like, he turns from them to the reader and it's like, are we all going to be worms that we're just concerned with the dirt, or are we going to look up at the heavens and be entranced by the beauty that the Creator has spun out for us? Yeah, I love that, Father. That's so true, right? Because then you've got all of these, they're all about, there's this longing, right? There's this, right? Like the proud, they're carrying these stones on their back because the Rilke poem that Sherry read in the Dante conversation yesterday, I've been going over and over and over. There's this one particularly wonderful line from it where he says, if you can give me a second, I'll read it. And what's wonderful is Sherry's own translation from the German. She read this other, the Poetry Foundation one, and then read hers and was like, oh, Sherry, you did a great job translating this from German. Yeah. It says, I am too small in the world, and yet not small enough to be in front of you like a thing, dark and clever. The poem is a prayer, but it's, I am too small in the world and yet not small enough. And that's what the image of the prideful is, right? That they're too small to carry the world, but they're not small enough to realize that they shouldn't.
And so it's like, because when you're proud, right? Aquinas would say that it is a defect in your appetites, right? That you are self-satisfied, that everything that you have right here is enough. And so you don't actually have the desire to go out of yourself, right? Because if you have to go out of yourself for something, that means that out there's something that you don't have already. And how can that be possible? Because everything I need is actually right here already.
Yeah.
And so that's a great burden to have to carry the universe on your shoulders like that, of having to be entirely self-sufficient. So it's like, okay, you want that burden, you'll have it. And then you just have to walk around Mount Purgatory with that weight on your back until you want it gone badly enough.
Oh, it's so true.
And Dante does this. Dante does this with every single layer of it. So let's just walk up Mount Purgatory, right? Because we're all going to have to do it anyway. You get to the level of the envious, right? The envious looked at beautiful things with their eyes, and they didn't look at what they should have desired the most. And so their eyes are sewn shut with iron thread.
Sewn shut.
Yeah, right.
Because and what's so cool too is even though they're always looking, actually they're blind, right?
Right.
And so now here's the manifestation of their spiritual state, right?
And so they have to have their eyes shut until they want to see God badly enough. And then once they actually want to see God badly enough, boom, you get your eyes open, right? You get to the Terrence of the Wrathful, right? That we've all been angry before, right? Are you at your smartest when you're angry? That's why you shouldn't discipline your children when you're angry, because you're not going to make a good decision under those circumstances. It's like, okay, you're going to be blinded in fog. Loud, clamorous fog
smoke,
until you want your head to be cleared enough.
It's worse than that. It's smoke. It like gets in your nostrils and in your eyes, and like I mean, this is Dante's so brilliant, right? Because when you're wrathful, you see red, and smoke makes your eyes red. That little passage right there, because he kind of weaves in and out of just exactly how allegorical he is. But Virgil says, like, close your eyes and hold on to me, right? Virgil is human reason. He's like, close your eyes, don't look at the things that might make you angry, and hold on to me. And the only way to walk is on this narrow pathway where we've got the smoke on one side and the sheer drop off on the other, and it's reason. It's a reason. He submits himself to reason, right? That's what's so cool. It's the humility to submit to reason out of your anger. He's getting small enough. He's getting small enough to walk that line.
And so when you want that smoke cleared out badly enough, then you can go up the level. Then you get to the ring of sloth, right? People who took rest in the long places. What do they have to do? They have to run around and around and around and around until they finally want to rest in that one who can provide the perfect rest. They go up another level. That's greed.
That's greed. Is greed the ones who are? Is greed the ones who are tied down, who are staked down?
Yeah.
Greed is the ones they're staked down.
And you go up to gluttony. They have to sit there and fast with the beautiful fruit in front of them until they're hungry for the real.
And the fountain that always evaporates right before it gets to them. You can't drink it
until they finally desire God enough to go up to the ring of lust. And then they just have to burn until they burn with passion until they finally want what's really good for them. And now we've come to the Garden of Paradise, and baha, it's Mark Lefebvre.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's man, I'm not living up to that, but I appreciate it.
But the snake, the dragon is in the garden, so there you go.
It's a dragon in the garden. And he loses his legs and becomes a snake because he does a bad thing. Maybe we don't know if it's a dragon. Well, the thing that struck me there that I wanted to pipe in on was this idea that you said that submit to reason. Okay, right? Submit to anything outside yourself. I mean, that's part of the reason why rationality as such, or reason as such, is important, right? Because that's a crack open into humility. Right? And even in the scientific worldview, it's like, well, look, they're still submitting to something outside themselves, just something that they think is totally within their control. And, I think that's the great problem with, I'll say it, even Peterson, but especially guys like Vervaeke or Sam Harris or any of these guys. Their general thesis, if you listen really carefully to what they're saying, and you can, it takes some work. But if you listen to what they're saying, their essential thesis is, I see objective material reality better than you. And if you saw it as well as I did, you'd agree with me. And then they don't have to use force to have power. They don't have to use coercion or charisma or convincing or anything, right? They just say, look, man, if you saw it this way, you'd agree with me, which is ridiculously false on so many levels. That's what they're doing. That's their trick.
Well, okay, Mark, I want to push back on that a little bit, because I want you to hone that idea down a little bit more, because in some sense, like, that's what any teacher comes to you and says, right? To some degree, they say, look. Well, I want to hear what you're saying, because it's like, look, when I say, Mark, like, I disagree with you, it's because I think that I see reality more clearly than you do in this area. Now, you might be saying that it's the absence of dialogue there, but it strikes me that that's like, I'm gonna take 2 steps back and you'll see where I'm coming at this. So you can imagine that, like, you know, some people see me as opinionated, and that's fine. But there's this weird notion that the things that I say, it's just because I just want to throw out what Ted says. It's like, well, no, I mean, like, I think I'm right because, like, I thought about it. And now that doesn't mean there's degrees of certainty in these things, but it's not like I only say things because I think they're true. That's what I'm trying to get at. I only say things because I think they're true. And so, like, I expect them to be true, or I hope that I'm right. And so do you see how that, when you put it that way, it sounds very similar to what you're saying about these guys.
Right.
I'm just trying to untangle that distinction, or maybe I'm wrong about myself.
No, I think you're wrong about yourself. I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. I think, you know, to some extent, although you're probably the least offender among them in the world, and I'm not being hyperbolic, you're stuck in a binary there. And the binary is the following, right? Because I was stuck in this binary for a while too. I was like, look, you know, I used to tell people, it's a trick. It's an easy trick. If you only talk about the things you know really well, you'll seem really smart. If you never talk,
sure, okay.
But that's not true of you or I, because we have this other mode of exploration. And you know, I'd like to say, like, I knew this all along, but like, I didn't recognize it for years, right? It's only within the past, we'll say 7-8 years that I've been able to articulate it. Okay. So I read someone like Taleb. So I read Nassim Taleb and I go, wow, this guy has a lot of the thoughts and has noticed a lot of things in the world that I also noticed that I've never heard anybody else say. And then I watch Peterson, and the same thing happens over. Like, Peterson, there's a couple of things Peterson said that I never heard anybody else say ever. That, well, other than one other person, like little things that aren't so little, like, hey, you know, there's a correlation between the flattening of the salaries in the United States and when women got into the workforce. Nobody ever talked about that, but that happened in the 70s, but it's right in the numbers, by the way. Like me, I noticed that. And I noticed it, honestly, because my mother pointed it out to me years ago, but it's true. Well, but then Peterson's the only other person I've ever heard say that. And I'm sure he's not the only person that said that, but, you know, and Taleb did a lot of the same things. He just talks about, like, you know, we calculate risk. But when you start thinking about how to articulate what that is, it's like, okay, there's people you find agreement with, but there's also modes of exploration. And a lot of this is, hey, I'm seeing this from my perspective. I wonder what you think about this, which is a phrase you use all the time, Ted, right? And so you're not being certain, right? You're being certain in your perspective. And you're saying, hey, man, this is what I see. But you know what? I bet you see something different. So why don't you tell me? And the problem for us is we often just agree, and so it's no fun. But when we do that with other people, sometimes they come up with stuff that we didn't see.
Well, Mark, if you want to hear me disagreeing with people, you should listen to the Divine Comedy, because Sherry and Nate were on the Universal Salvation train, and as the one Orthodox Catholic in the room, I was really trying to hold them down a little bit.
I heard. Michelle told me, oh, this is what happened, and I'm like, what? Ted was where? With Nate? Really? And Sherry? Oh, that must have been. And he says, you have to listen to it. I'm like, all right, I'm on it, because that's going to be fascinating.
It was a lot of fun. It was, you know, and what's really cool too. Okay, well, Mark, I love your point then, because look, because that, I mean, I think that is something like humility, because humility isn't just the gateway to the moral virtues. I think it's also the gateway to the intellectual virtues. And what's fun is, right, so here's a great example of this, right? So we go to Canto 4 in the Inferno. It's in limbo, and Nate and Sherry, like, they're ready to see stuff about let's see, hope for the salvation of the damned. And I'm not, like, that's not what I'm primed to look for at all. And so they notice this discussion about baptism. There's like particular mention of baptism, and what happened is when they brought that up, there's this weird little throwaway line when they walk into the castle where all the great people from the pagan classical era are. There's a river, and then there's the castle gates. And Dante says, and we walked over the river like it was dry ground. Yeah. And I thought, how many times have I read that? 15 times probably, because read the first part of the Inferno and then drop it, and then sometimes I make it all the way through the comedy. But I thought I'd never gotten it, and then all of a sudden I thought, oh my goodness, it's because they're not baptized. They can't pass through the river because then they'd be baptized. You walk over it, and then I started thinking about it, and I realized in the Inferno there's 4 river crossings. Dante never goes in the water. He wakes up, he faints on one side and wakes up on the other. That's one of them. The second one is he walks over on dry land, like it's dry land. The third one, he gets ferried over by a boat. And the fourth one, he gets carried, it's the river of blood of the wrathful, and he gets carried over on the back of a centaur. No baptism. When he gets to the top of Mount Purgatory, he walks through 2 rivers, right? In the water. And I was like, oh my goodness, it all makes sense. This is so wild. And it's like, how many, and so to your point, right? I'm coming at this with Nate and Sherry, who I obviously don't share their perspective on this, but because I engaged with them in that way, all of a sudden it just like unlocked this whole structural thing for me.
Right. But there's 2 things there. One is the willingness to explore and to ask other people like, hey, what do you think? But the other one, and I think the more important one, and the one that gets us in particular, you and I, into the most trouble, is being willing to state your current position. Like, look, I'm willing to tell you where I stand. I'm very sorry if that upsets you, but I think it's massively unfair to people not telling people things is a crime. It's a crime that was done to me my whole life. Like, little funny story. So it's on the Discord in the early days, on the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis server and on BOM and that stuff. And one day, Semi-Joe, people who know will know Semi-Joe. Semi-Joe comes, he says, Mark, your profile picture, because I did half camera and half off camera stuff. He says, your profile picture, you look like an old lady. And I'm like, what? And he's like, well, yeah, and everyone's kind of talking about it, but no one told. And it had been months, Ted, months. And I was like, look, it's a picture. I had just gotten back from Hawaii. I had a fantastic time in Hawaii. Blew a ton of money. It was a great time. And it was me in a hat, in a big sun hat. You know, I had a big sun. It's freaking Hawaii, dude. Like, what do you think I'm gonna wear? An Hawaiian shirt. And the profile pic was shrunk down and probably de-resed. I don't like the software, but it shrunk down. So you couldn't really tell that it wasn't an old lady. None of these bastards had the nuts to tell me this. None of them. At any time, and to this day, I'm on, it doesn't matter what server I'm on. The number of times when my audio is bad that somebody just tells me, oh, we can't hear you or whatever, is like vanishingly small. I want to know these things, damn it. But I think it's unfair to not to tell people where you stand.
Blows from a friend.
They don't know how to approach you correctly.
Yes, there's all these proverbs in the book of Proverbs about how, like, don't trust hugs from an enemy, but blows from a friend you can trust.
Yes.
And there's this really interesting. My wife, when she was in Bible school, there's one of her friends there. He was the same. So he was Ukrainian, and he was maybe 5 years older than most of the students. But he just had that like Slavic like bluntness, and everyone loved him because they would tell that he would say exactly what he thought. He wasn't being mean, like I'm just being honest. No, like he actually was like, I think it's a really bad idea that you're talking to that person that way. And it's like you'd think, oh, no one wants to talk to him. No, like flies to vinegar, which is funny because everyone says you attract more flies with honey than vinegar, and that's actually completely wrong. They all go to the vinegar, and it's like, yeah. There's
well, it's the honesty that people are attracted to because people like truth. Yeah. Like at the end of the day, right now when the truth doesn't agree with you, you can choose to get upset, but that just means you're a rebel who wants the world to be what it is in your head and doesn't want to learn.
Because you're not humble.
Because you're not humble.
Yeah. Hey, Andrew, which Andrew are you? Do I know you?
New Andrew.
It's a different Andrew.
I don't know.
Sorry, I'm loud train.
I think I was the first Andrew on the Discord, but there have been so many since that I can't keep track of them. So
you're definitely not Andrew L. I can tell you that, and you're not Andrew K. either. So we've got to assign you an alphanumeric code so we need you straight.
You need to change your name, dude. Sorry.
There's B.
Andrew B. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess.
Oh, would you be this guy?
Yeah.
Oh,
Andrew the
okay.
first.
So
Oh.
you're in. Sorry, I've
Korea?
seen you on the Bridges of Meaning. You're in
Yeah.
South Korea, right?
Yes.
Okay. How's
Cool.
life in South Korea?
It's not so bad, I guess. It's I'm still here for a while.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
we'll
In
see how
Seoul?
long it lasts. Yeah.
I
You
just
know,
saw.
my dad was actually deployed to South Korea a fair bit, and he started hanging out with this Polish missionary priest. And this Polish missionary priest was super hardcore. He had like a very restricted diet. He spent a lot of time in prayer. And my dad was, we'll say, spiritually immature at that time. And Father Paul would just say to him, "Shut up, my brother, you are stupid," or something like that. You know, in such a way that they knew it was, but it was just like, "Yeah, kid, you don't know what's going on." This was like 20 years ago.
Per
Right?
Mark, per Mark.
Yeah, my dad loved him. Him. They were doing all sorts of stuff together. He started taking his faith a lot more seriously. Things were going well. So, yeah.
Well, I hang out with an Italian priest every Sunday, so it's a very international place.
I think kids love that too. I think kids feel really insecure until you tell them like, "Hey man, you can't do that. Like we don't do that kind of thing around here."
They need boundaries. People need boundaries.
They
Otherwise,
really need
they'll go
it.
completely insane. And I was thinking about this while mowing. Yes, I mowed today. It's very interesting. I was thinking about this while mowing. It's like some people will reject their father for whatever reason, right? At a falling out, it doesn't really matter, right? But then it's Papa Peterson for them. And it's like, well, how interesting. And they like that, right? Because they're getting something that they know they should have gotten, right? From father, and they've transported it to another person to get around whatever problem they're having with their actual father, usually, right? And the other, and so that was a theme I've been sort of circling with. The other theme I've been circling around that you guys kind of covered, which is this morphing of evangelicalism into this more sneaky form. And I don't think it serves anything. Like, I think you're better off being upfront with people and bumping up against them, but also, look, it's important to know that there's men and women and that they're different. Like, men are not large women and women are not tiny men, as Sally Joe would say.
Listen, Mark, you're not going to hear much argument on the. I'm a steep slope guy at heart, like every day. So
I would never have known if you hadn't mentioned it.
I know, we're all surprised here.
So I want to ask about I wanted to jump in a few minutes ago, but I didn't get to. You were talking about the different levels in Dante's Inferno and these things people wanted in life that didn't serve them well. And so now they're playing out this penance for that. And I'm interested in, how do we cultivate our wants? And one big one that I've really found on, like, you are the equivalent of people you hang out with. So that's an easy one. That's one that I can grab hold of. Oh, okay. Yeah. If you are hanging out with people and they all wear blue sneakers, sooner or later, you're going to want some freaking blue sneakers. And maybe that's dumb, And so, or maybe, hey, maybe the blue sneaker people got it together and go get some blue sneakers, be part of that club. But so that's one way I've seen. But when it comes to those more subtle humors and like when it comes to envy, when it comes to success in life, when it comes to actually pursuing God's will in your life, but not knowing what that looks like at all, how do you cultivate wants? And that was something that interested me.
Yeah. So it depends on what kind of person you are. There are some people that actually find fasting easy. It's not that big a deal for them to, let's say, go a day without eating, right?
But I'm not actually interested in. I'm interested in, I want to.
Yeah.
It's not about succeeding at it. That's not the part that I'm interested in. Because I actually think if it's less of a sin to fail at something, but it's more of a sin to not want it at all.
Yeah.
And so, but that's the bigger trick, right? Because it's one thing I'm like, oh yeah, I want to fast, and I try every Saint's Day, but then about 4:30, I just have a saltine, and that's what happens. And I tried, that's whatever. Like that's just being a flawed person. But to not even want to just, and I see, because this is the thing I hate the most. I hate apathy the most. And there's so many people that they don't even have the hunger to desire to do something like fasting or do something like get out of their comfort zone. And I have many hungers, and I think some of them are good and some of them are prideful, and I can't tell, but I know they're better than apathy. So that's where I get like this interest in this cultivating wants. I'm uncertain.
So there's, like on a practical level, I think first of all, like Lewis's argument is this is what education was. Education was not to give you information. It was to make you have the right tastes. That was what education was for. And he makes that point. Like that's basically what the abolition of man is about, right? And how we've just like completely blown it. So, but in response to that, I would say there's sort of like I feel like there's two strands to that. One is stories and poetry, right? Because the stories that we tell ourselves, and poetry and stories are deeply interrelated, really inform. And if you're asking, how do you get someone to desire things when they don't desire anything, I would give the same response as Chesterton gives, which is, to the man who wants nothing, I have nothing to give. It's like, I don't know that there's not an answer to that except prayer for them. But then if you're like moving somewhere and you're like, yeah, this is not in the right direction, that's one. And then liturgy is another. Liturgy and prayer and asceticism. So there's a retired professor from Notre Dame, Dr. Fagerberg. He's got a couple of lectures on like 4 or 5 lectures on asceticism on a very rad trad podcast called Sensus Fidelium. Yes, but his lectures, even if you're not Catholic, just going and listening to his lectures on asceticism, they're just awesome. I mean, they're so and he's also a delight to listen to because he was a lit professor, so who studies liturgy, and so he's just so much fun to listen to. Asceticism and the Chronicles of Narnia, that would be the one that I would go to.
It's how this talking overlaps so intensely onto food, because I wasn't thinking about food when I started. But like in the Eastern tradition, or the Orthodox, which I looked at until I didn't, but they have different fasts and they're continually changing. Mm-hmm. And then also you talked about development of taste, and think about all of the problems we have with processed food and literally poor taste, because our taste is ruined to not be able to appreciate vinegars and whole foods. Because like the first thing that you notice if you cut corn syrup out of your diet is you can taste fruit and vegetables again. Like you just can't taste them. They taste like nothing, and then they taste like something. Like it's very.
But it's the tuning, and I think that's it's like learning to appreciate wine, right?
Yeah.
Not that you should, and I think this is where we get it wrong. That our cognition is limited, and when we use it in one way, we lose it in another way, and it's that proper balance that you need, and so that's what requires education. That's what education is for, to your point, Ted.
The conundrum of when you don't allow kids to direct interface with the world, and then you disrupt their taste. It's like diabetes senses or something, because if they don't see, like if you don't let a kid play out being mean to other kids, leads you to not be able to associate with other kids, and you always like, well, he didn't mean it, I'll apologize, everybody had. When you do all that garbage and they don't see how virtues help them,
that's a consequence.
That's a big, and maybe that's some of this dulling down, because I've thought about this a lot, is like, how do you get people to want, and like, it's very scary to raise kids, because it's like, how do you get them to want the right things? And
with children, like, want them yourself.
Well, yeah. No, and that's where thinking of it at first, but this is something that you worry about as a parent. Is like, what if my kids don't want the right things? And one of the best things you could do that you feel like you can control is just get them around people that want the right things and hope that works. Because at some point, it's not just you that has power over them, and it shouldn't be even.
No, it's exemplification, but that goes back to, again, I think one of Vicky's excellent points. We don't need to make everybody wiser, but we need more wise men to be exemplars in the world.
Mm. Yeah, there's so many things that Sally Joe was saying that were striking me. One is sometime way earlier this year, BVK pulled some little discussion on one of these channels about simulacra, and I don't know who it was or what, but he walked through this whole process of like this hypothetical process of like wild strawberries all the way to the Jolly Rancher strawberry slushy at the gas station.
I remember that.
Oh, it was great. So Sally, I mean, I think partially what you're wanting to know is like, how do you get a kid to recognize that the Notre Dame Cathedral is more beautiful than the McDonald's playground, even though the McDonald's playground has more color?
Yeah, I mean, it's easier to talk about it with kids. I really was focusing on it myself because I really do, like, maybe this is just me being a control freak. I want to control my wants. I want my wants to be better. I want my wants to be in alignment with the kingdom of heaven. And it's very hard to tell if what is hurting me is I get the sense, and it's maybe this is just being a deranged Baptist. If you're suffering, you're not following God's will correctly. And if you're wanting something and you're burdened with it, then it must be because you're not following God's will right. And so then it's like, if that's not what it is, what is it? And then why do I want it at all if that's not God's will? It's just, and I get very wrapped up, but it is easier to demonstrate and illustrate it with kids. But I'm kind of talking about it at a much more deep brain level because, like, yeah, it'd be fun to manipulate it with kids, but that's not where the beginning of the problem is. The beginning of the problem is with the adults in the room, because I find kids typically like the Notre Dame Cathedral more than the McDonald's Playhouse, as long as they're not told to shut up in it. But up until the point of the rules, like if there was the same rules at the McDonald's Playhouse, I think they'd pick Notre Dame. But I can't prove it.
But that was the opening, really, right? And especially this talk about the lack of appreciation of, I don't want to call it suffering, I want to call it struggle, right? The struggle with the cross is what you're supposed to be able to appreciate and, quote, see through. I think Ted, you put that pretty well. I'm so looking forward to that talk. I really got to listen to it. Yeah, I mean that is the problem. It's if you associate, and it comes from psychology, unfortunately, which is just the dumbest way to think about the world. If you associate goodness with happiness or pleasure, right, and that's what you're supposed to move towards at the same time. That's 3 errors, by the way, not 2, not 1. It's 3 errors. Then you're going to run into this problem of, well, yeah, if you're suffering or you're not happy, then you're doing something wrong. And it's like, that's not true at all. I mean, that's why people are fascinated. I think that's why Protestants are fascinated with Job. I think that's exactly why.
Well, Job is incredibly vexing, and I mostly get stuck on the fate of Job's first wife. But, that's just me.
Job is super clear. Like, why is anybody people are vexed? Like, really? That's not that difficult.
Job's wife died?
If you rethink Job from the lot of his first wife, it's a very depressing story.
It doesn't say, right? But it's like, well, he had those other kids, afterwards, and they were grown.
The marriage was it was just revitalized. Look, things were just revitalized.
Like, I mean, maybe Job's first wife and the kids went straight to heaven. They got special accommodation, like, sorry about the suffering, and then they move on. But it just seems like a bummer. Job's first wife didn't do nothing, and there she went. And it's
but he said, why don't you curse God and die? That's probably what happened to her. She cursed God and died.
But I mean,
Job doesn't do anything either. If you think Job did something to get it, it's like, no, that's the whole point.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just being a bleeding heart about it. It's just like all of her kids died. I mean, God, like it was awful. Anyway, I'm not saying awful things can't happen in stories. It just
Yeah, but that's the point. I mean, to some extent, and look, this is when people pull out Heidegger, right? And Heidegger comes up with this cool term called thrownness. It's like, oh, you mean we were born at a certain place in a certain time? That's the whole communication. You can go on for days. Okay, that's literally all he's saying, that you were born in a certain place at a certain time. That's all he's saying.
It's still a great term, though. I love the term. Thrownness is such an awesome term.
Maybe, but like it's not that deep. Like, the fact that you were born is really not like some mystery thing that people shouldn't be aware of. Like I'm pretty sure everyone can figure that out by themselves on their own. They don't need to read Heidegger to figure that one out. But that means that there's some amount, and I want to avoid the word suffering. There's some amount of struggle because we're alive, and we should be struggling in our humility to be better than we are. And that's what people miss. Like, you want to get better? That you're going to have to give up something you have now. You're already in sacrifice and struggle mode immediately if you want something more than you have now, or even different than you have now. Let's say it's not more. Let's say it's less. Let's say you want to downsize because the kids are gone or whatever. It's still a struggle. Like, any change is a struggle, and it should be. And there's nothing wrong with that. And we need to come to terms with that, because we've been told, no, you should be happy, and you should be able to do things, and you should be successful, and you should be all this garbage. It's a bunch of bullshit. It's all wrong.
And I wanna talk a little bit because it's my show. And I'm thinking especially of the more advanced stages of the spiritual life. So you've got the way of beginners, the way of the proficient, and the way of the perfect, right? The way of the beginners comes in with this taming of the appetites. You're spending time in prayer rather than doing whatever you want to do. You're spending time fasting rather than just indulging your appetites constantly. And you're giving away your things, almsgiving, rather than just keeping things to yourself. Every single one of those, you are making a sacrifice, and you have to cut against some level of desire. It might not be a strong desire at the time. And so on that level, we've got this, you're running a program, you're submitting to some kind of a spiritual regimen in order to strengthen your desires for what is right. Now, in the way of the beginners, God tends to give you a lot of encouragement because you're small and you're dumb and you don't know what's good. So he's giving you lots of encouragement. It's like how if you have a child and they make little baby steps, you're very pleased with the baby steps because that's actually really good progress for a baby. Whereas if that's all I could manage, unless I had been injured or sick or something, that would just be like, why are you walking like that, you weirdo? Walk like a man, And then you get to the stage of transition between the way of beginners and the way of the proficient. It's called the dark night of the senses, or the passive purgation of the senses, where God begins to withdraw the very obvious encouragements that he's given you, because he doesn't want you to, it'd be like training a dog and never stopping giving them treats, right? Once the dog is properly trained, you stop giving them the treats, and then they just do what's right because that's what you've been trained to do. Now you're operating at a higher level because you're a human being, and so you're capable of appreciating things on a higher level. Don't worry about it. But it's called the dark night of the senses. It's a painful thing to have that taken away from you, but precisely through the suffering that you go through of losing this particular mode of connection with God that you have, it actually purifies your desires and it makes them stronger and better. And so when you actually are encountering suffering, and we'll say it's not, injustice being inflicted upon you, because if injustice is being inflicted upon you, you probably have to do something, or at least try to do something about that. So don't just put up with somebody abusing you, basically. But let's just say it's just life coming at you. You've got just the regular struggles of everyday life. It's precisely through working through that, of sacrificing and striving with the cross, that your desires are actually purified.
Mm.
And that stinks to have to say it like that. So if you're suffering and you're moving towards something that you have a good enough reason to believe it's good, that's progress right there. A progress on purification of your desires. You shouldn't imagine that it's something you can just program, turn it on and off like a hose. You got to treat it like a living thing. And sometimes with our plants, we prune them.
This sounds very Catholic, as opposed to the evangelical, just say this prayer and your life will be changed forever in a moment, which is interesting. It makes more sense, at least to me. My common sense seems to jive with a little bit better than what I grew up with, which was, I think what somebody was talking about earlier, if it's not going well, it's because you're not properly, I guess, it's sort of your fault. You're not, you don't want the right things. Well, okay, how do I want the right things then? That turns out to be a process more than you didn't say the right words at the right time.
No, very interesting.
Oh, sorry.
No, I wasn't meaning to. I don't know how long I can stay, so I'm being a little pushy. I that's a very interesting answer, and thank you for that, because I kind of know it's a dumb question, but I think it's a dumb question lots of people have, and I don't think a lot of people hear that ideas about the different levels, and that initial communication with God might have to be expected to change, and that you might not hear. And also, like, it's almost, when you get it reiterated to you enough times, it's hard to wrap your head around. You can have a spiritual agony and still be walking in the right way. That's hard to process for me, because that is, I'm like, that should be an indicator of wrong way. And then you revert back to comfort, and then you don't get nothing done outside the walls of your church building, and you stand around sniffing roses until you die. And it's not the worst thing you could be doing, but I don't think it's the best either. So trying to figure that out.
Oh, here comes the roses. You're kind of blurry right now, Mark.
I didn't mean you had to film the book. I just was already.
There's the roses. That's what happens with the comfort.
I'm gonna
and
go.
You gotta get the dog headed to come and save you, because they notice.
I'm gonna go and parent now, but thanks for having me on and letting me interrupt and stuff. I'll be watching.
Always good to see you, Miss Sally. And she's now gone. The dog-headed approach with metal.
That's right. I know. We need some music behind it. That's not a bad idea. We should do some music behind it. Yeah. I think when people, I mean, I think people are totally unused to being told things. Right? They're like sort of this morphed evangelicalism, this big tent, everything you do is okay and whatever, it's all fine nonsense. It just reinforces the bad behavior of, you should be comfortable. God should make you comfortable. And then that's why they're fascinated with Job. God's clearly not making Job very comfortable here. And this isn't clear to us why this is happening. And he doesn't seem to have done anything wrong with it, because it's the Protestants that don't get the story. And I'm like, really? The story's really clear, guys. Why is this confusing? Why is this something you're puzzling over? It's really clear. It's a very straightforward story. It's not a happy story. It might have an okay ending, but it's only an okay ending.
That's an interesting one. I was having some off the internet conversations with another guy, with a peer that I met at Chino, He was
That's interesting. That's a good quote.
Mm.
You were not made for comfort. You were made for greatness. Rise to
Benedict
it.
the 16th, man. What an absolute Chad.
This notion of like, but Mark, like, I'm going to push back on that, like on the ending of Job, because there's this notion, at least in the New Testament, that seems to suggest that somehow the end of Job is better than the beginning. You get that, you know, when our Lord, he tells all these parables that say crazy things like, there's the father has more delight in the prodigal son who comes back, who has spent half of the family estate on prostitutes and drugs, basically, and comes back. He's like more delighted with that than with a son who's been hanging out there the whole time. And you can go into why that is, but like, or, you know, he leaves the 99 sheep. I mean, he leaves the 99 sheep and finds one. Brings it. There's this like, there's something crazy going on there. There is.
That's the exploration. But that's the exploration. So again, right there it is, right there. I haven't read the book, so sounds like it's got some good themes. Right, that's the exploration. I'd rather have you explore badly than do nothing. Fair, right? And then it's not about the outcome. It's not about did this go well for you or not? It's about, did you move? Because life is struggle, and if you're not struggling, you're not living.
Well, there's definitely something in all of this about that's an anti-consequentialist notion, and I'm like, I am on that one really hard, and I actually think that this is why stories are so important and why they fascinate us, because we want. So, Mark, I think I got this from you. This notion of poetry as moving from one-to-one correspondence to many-to-many correspondence. Love it. It's great. Thank you. I appreciate that one. We want these forms of simple causality, and that's what consequentialism is fundamentally. It's not do this thing and somehow good things will come out. No, it's I immediately see where the result. The thing that seems to be the immediate result from the action is the consequence. And so
right.
One of the reasons that I am fascinated by The Lord of the Rings is that Tolkien has written some narrative causality into that story that is so shockingly complex, so that you get this stuff that happens in The Hobbit that 40 years later at the end of The Lord of the Rings, something's happening. And I think part of the reason that we love that is because we don't get the story. Here's not like the story of Ted's life. I get to see, and I get to make choices. You know, I get to see how like my decisions. No.
It's not like you're playing a video game and it's like, oh, +1 for good.
Yes,
Exactly.
It's not like that at all. And so you can't. So I think an antidote to consequentialist morality is actually reading stories, because they give you the capacity to have the faith that doing what is right, and that causes and effects are actually generally very hidden. Most effects are very hidden.
Or there's another solution to that, Ted. The solution is vertical causality, where let's suppose you had a very complex story where it was fully consequentialist. And I think this is Job. Job is consequentialism.
I agree.
Consequences aren't material. And when the consequences aren't material, that's that non-linear, non-discrete, right? It's all up there in the ethereal. Those are the consequences matter.
Well, there's two ways. I think there's two ways you can be appropriately a consequentialist. One is vertically, and the other one is eschatologically, right? So you look up or you look to the end, right? Because what do stories do? Stories give you a mini eschaton. The book of Revelation, if you call it a story, it's because it had something like the end of, like there's some revelation at the end. That's why we call it a story, because it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And those are meaningfully related to each other. And Tolkien plays with this. There's this, I think one of the best parts in the trilogy is when Sam and Frodo are talking they've made it through Mordor, right? All this, it's the beginning. It's sort of the beginning of their stage of the Return of the King. And Frodo has the little glass, the phial that Galadriel gave him. And you're like, oh, it like all of a sudden comes out and has this beautiful moment where they use it to overcome the darkness of this horrible spider monster, right, Mark? Monsters. It's spiders and snakes. So you're like, oh, you have this moment of satisfaction that like this thing connected, right? And you see Galadriel's wisdom and giving it to him. But then Sam says, wait a minute. The light in there comes from the Silmaril that Arendelle has, which is the morning star, right? Galadriel puts the light of the Silmaril in the file. And so and then if you've read the Silmarillion, all of a sudden it's like the whole thing blows out like this, and you realize, and Sam says, do any of the stories ever really end? And Frodo says, no, some people just, we just enter them and leave. Right. And so there's a sense in which we read these little stories so that we can have the faith that there's this enormous story. And that's what I mean. You can be, eschatologically, I'm a full consequentialist. Absolutely. I believe that every single thing we do has some outcome, but you can't necessarily see it. And in fact, no, it's not even that you can't necessarily see it. It's actually impossible to see it until everything is over. You actually can't know what anything truly means.
It goes past you. It goes past you.
Yes, that's right.
It goes past you in every possible conceivable way. So not just past you in time, but past other people, right? Because there's stuff out there that, so years ago I went to this interview, and one of the guys, he was like the VP, I got to interview with him, and he said, oh, it's this here, you work for this company, MFS. And I was like, yeah, I worked there. I had worked there like 5 years previous or something. And oh no, I'm sorry, I had worked there 10 years previous. And he said, when I left 5 years ago, your procedure was still being used. And I was like, what? Like, I didn't write any like groundbreaking procedure. I mean, I wrote procedures when I was there, but and I only signed one of them, so I actually knew which one it was. And it was like, really? That was kind of a minor one, but okay, I'm glad to know that, it's something I put in place. And unfortunately, I didn't get that job. It was a cool job. But that impact, like, I had no expectation that writing some stupid computer procedure for doing some upgrades would still be in use that long after I was a contractor. I wasn't even supposed to be there it was a 3-month contract, 3 months, you leave. You don't expect for years people to be using your stuff over and over again. But that had happened, and I had no idea. And who knows how many people benefited from me developing that procedure?
Yeah.
A lot of
well,
right? You don't know.
Well, this is the universal history thing too, right? The whole project of universal history is to tie as much of this in together as you can, and that's Dante and Virgil going and seeing Caesar, Julius Caesar, and seeing Aristotle, and seeing Homer and Electra and all the Latin and Greek heroes. Now, here's the weird part. Here's the part where it gets weird. You're like, oh yeah, Dante looked back and saw he's connected to them. It's like, yeah. And then me and Nate Heil and Sherry all get on a video call together and talk about it. And all of a sudden, 2023 is tied into that same story. And the things that Julius Caesar did and Dante did are still echoing right now to this day. And this conversation is one more part of it. It's like,
and they don't know. And they don't know. They don't know how many lives, but universal history is all about finding commonality again.
Yeah.
All about bringing us back in. So you can say, well, it's not true. It's like, well, except that it's bringing us back together.
Yes.
And in us coming back together, truth emerges, because we're too stupid to find it on our own. That's why postmodernism is a civilization-ending mind virus.
Yeah.
This happens. Like a good reason to read old books.
Attaboy, Andrew.
Absolutely. I think this dynamic of, we'll say, sowing a seed and reaping 100 or 60 or 30-fold, that doesn't just happen with the Julius Caesars and the Homers and the Virgils either. It happens on like every level of society on multiple time spans, right? So it's like, you could just be kind to somebody someday.
Yeah.
Like, who knows what that's going to do?
You don't. Yeah.
Just
you don't,
giving
you
them
don't have any idea.
5 minutes of kind attention. It's like, you've got no idea where that's going to go, but it might be that they go home and then they show kindness to like 2 other people, and then you just got this big old, like, you don't know. This is why you always have to keep your lamp filled with oil and burning, because you do not know when the Lord is going to visit you, and you do not know that when he's going to need you to say an encouraging word to somebody.
If you want life to be an adventure, like, I really think that just like this is, and this is the thing, okay, because there's, Father, I love that, because, there's the Julius Caesars, but then it's like, even on the day-to-day level, like, the way that the world holds together is just people that none of us see. who just get up and they hold things together for another day. Like, that's actually how civilization persists. It's not leaders. You could have the best leaders in the world, and if people didn't get up and just do what they were supposed to do, all gone. Over in 5 days. Seriously.
Well, and you
Like,
and you
5
know
days
that.
and most people, 5 days and most people are dead without the common, without just like the decent virtue of most people.
Well, and you know that because the leaders change all the time, and yet things still keep running. You didn't think about that, did you? It's one of the things that Peterson points out, although maybe he doesn't do a deep enough job of it. That really grabs people. Like, oh, there's guys out there making sure the electricity is still going. There's guys out there making sure the sewers don't get clogged. There's guys out there making sure the water is pumped. There's right, and not for everybody. I'm on a well. I don't, whatever.
So-
but those people are out there with the electricity, and they're working hard. And there's all kinds of there's people paving the roads. There's people cutting down the verge around the roads so that I can see out my driveway. I don't die when I try to pull out. Because that could happen. People go pretty fast on my street.
You were against de-Baathification in Iraq, is what you're saying? When the Bush administration decided to get rid of all the Ba'ath Party officials who were, keeping the electricity on in Baghdad back in 2003, and everything descended into chaos for a decade after.
Yeah, it doesn't actually work. Well, and did we come rushing in and actually fix it, or did we come rushing in and fail to make it work? And was that really the cattle? It's on and on and on. I mean, because
it sounds like you're saying that the average Joe is more important than the whoever the latest.
The average Joe can keep things running. The leaders can only destroy things.
Exactly.
That's the wrong way to think about it. And this is where we go wrong on this. It's the scaling problem. It's not the average Joe versus the leader. That's never what it is. It's the fact that there are lots of average Joes and very few leaders.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's the scaling problem. It's the fact that it's not you as an individual is more important than the president. That's definitely not true in any sense. It's the fact that multiple people like you doing what you do is way more important than who the leader is, which is a very different statement that we in recent times don't seem to, the Gnosticism, because we're individualistic, we tend to put everything back down into, that means me and them. No, that's a statement of the importance of people that do what you do or at your stratum of society versus the importance of the guy at the top or the 5 people at the layer down from the top, or whatever scale you want to look at. The scale matter. I mean, this is why Vervaeke's distributed cognition, when he talks about that, very important to understand. Why is it that the smartest, literally the smartest people, although you could argue they're not there now, in search in the whole world can't prevent people from destroying the search algorithm? That's because there's a lot more not as bright people working on it, and that intelligence is greater than the top 10 minds of the world in all cases for all things. Very hard. There's the universalism. In all cases, for all things, the large number of less intelligent people. This goes back to Peterson and Jaak Panksepp and the chimps and all that, right? Yeah, you can look. You don't understand the world if you think one tyrannical chimp can rule forever. Like, you don't understand that. No, 2 chimps can take out one. I don't care how strong he is, and it's because you've thought of it as a binary. You've thought of it as one chimp versus tyrannical chimp. But that's not, there isn't that. That doesn't exist anywhere. Wherever you have a tyrannical chimp, you have a bunch of chimps below him. And man, if 2 or 3 of them get together, that top chimp's gone. And why didn't we know this? But we've lost that understanding, that idea that scale matters and the number of people matters. And that, when you have a lot of drones or NPCs or however you want to, derange them or classify them or whatever, or degrade them, they're actually more important because there's more of them, and the strength of those people doing that thing is much greater than the strength of the guy at the top telling you to wear a mask and everybody going, "Nah, we're not doing it, dude. Didn't happen."
Oh,
yeah.
my goodness.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like the work of the church would ground to a halt if women ever decided they didn't want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
That might have happened
Just
at
like,
some point.
yeah, or like the secretaries. If all the secretaries, sorry, excuse me, my bad. Administrative assistants. If they all decided they didn't want to be a part of an organization, that organization's not going to function anymore.
Done. Completely
Absolutely won't.
Yeah. It's like the meek will inherit the earth or something.
That's really good. I should write that down.
I know. Someone should have said that before.
done. Somebody
And
should
the
write that down.
meek
You know what?
shall inherit
Somebody
the
should have written
earth.
that down years ago and passed it on.
Yeah, maybe so.
Mark, you haven't read that book.
Yeah. It's a good one.
But what? Now you're making a claim that I can't validate independently.
Oh my
I'd
goodness.
have to go to my bookshelf and open the damn thing and thumb through it.
There's some
And then,
good
and then
stuff.
with which translation? So see, that's not even a
Dewey Rames. That's easy.
Venerable Dewey.
Oh,
All right, I'm gonna head out, you guys. This was nice to listen to. I gotta go be productive today. So
yeah, thanks for
Good to see you,
jumping in.
Andrew.
Enjoy
Your
tomorrow.
productivity is valuable to the whole world. Take care. Nice to meet you,
Yeah.
Andrew.
yeah, you too.
Matt, that's what you do, man.
Well, and maybe that statement in the beginning, Father Eric, is really your struggle matters to God.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
Maybe that's even a better message.
that's got to be it. Well, because you actually can't fix people's struggles. Like, people are going to struggle. I mean,
When you're not supposed to.
this is the thing that I've done this exercise so many times in my head. It's like, you think about, like, what are the things that we generally look at that make people's lives better? It's like on a really high level, access to information, access to relationships, access to energy, like power, work, access to food, right? And you're like, okay, I'm just going to run through those 4 real quick from like 200 years ago. It's like access to food with what I can buy, like 400 times above the average, the global average. Okay. Access to relationships. Oh my goodness. Right. Theoretically, like 2 billion people I could be in touch with. So was that like on the scale of tens to hundreds of millions times more, depending on where I lived? Energy, not quite as much, maybe 1,000 times more. If I had a cow versus like the fact that I'm tapped into the electrical grid. Well, I mean, how much power could I buy? I could buy so much electricity. I could buy so much electricity and gas, right? Like, I could buy a gas tanker. It's like, that's more energy than a village uses in 5 years. It's like, and then information. It's like, dude, come on. How's it even close? You're talking about scales of billions. And yet, like, am I even 10 times qualitatively better off than people were 200 years ago? We're not talking like 1,000,000 times or 100,000. It's like, am I 10 times better off? It's like, absolutely not. It's like, okay, we're just not going to solve that. We're not going to get to everyone's happy because they have enough. Like, that's just like, if you want a piece of empirical evidence that's been established, like, it doesn't get any better than that. That, like, we're not going to solve people being discontented with just getting them more stuff. It just isn't gonna happen. And so we're going to struggle. And it's like, I don't know. It's just like so weird to me. I'm like, the last 200 years have been the most splendid and astonishing demonstration of this fact. And yet we're all like, like when I read tech news and I read these startups and they're like, yeah, you should have less friction in your, finding a rental car. I'm like, where's this should coming from? That you shouldn't have to work to get a rental car. And so, like, people are dumping millions of dollars in this startup or whatever it is. It's like, there's this bizarre, you want to talk about like undergirding notions of our civilization. And it's that, like, your life should be without friction. There should be no friction in your life at any point. And it's like,
right.
First of all,
well, but that's other people wanting you to mind read them so they don't have to do any work.
Yeah. Well, what we want is we want AI that can mind read us by using our data signatures. So that
It's explicit.
It's absolutely explicit. No one's hiding this. This is 100% the goal is that I will be able to have synthetic relationships that
Yep.
reduce all emotional and relational friction down to zero, because
Right.
they will, because this is where it's weird, because I will be known, right? That's like, dude, it's like,
I will be known. Right.
yeah, I will be known, and then I'll no longer
Right.
suffer. Like, that's the promise that's held
Right.
out by this stuff. And and to go back to Sally Joe's point, right? The problem is that if you don't have friction, your appetites will eat you. They will.
Right.
There ain't no way around it. Either
Right.
you order your appetites or they will eat you. And the only way to order your appetites is through friction. Like, this is why rich people's children went crazy all the time across history. Very few of them are put together. It's like they're always alcoholic or philanderers or whatever. It's like, and now we're all the children of rich people, at least in the West.
Right.
All the children of rich people.
Yes.
And like, it just doesn't go well unless, and it's like the success, like even if you look back historically and you look at like the successful lineages of rulers, it's because they made their kids work really dang hard, even though they're the son of the king. It's like, yeah, you know what? You're going to get your butt kicked. You're going to learn how to fight, and you're going to learn how to wear armor, and you're going to learn how to ride a horse, and you're going to go out on the front lines because you're going to know that you're mortal.
Yeah.
Like, those are the princes that like held a kingdom together.
Right. Well, and even in recent times, if you you're a trust fund baby, yes, you are. Yeah. Well, and it's the trust of Christendom that you've been.
Dang, Mark, that'll preach. Let's go.
Yeah, it's the trust of Christendom that you've plundered and wasted with your wayward fantasies. But that ties back into what you were saying before, Ted, about rationality being outside of yourself is some way to help orient, right?
Yeah.
It's not sufficient, unfortunately, right? But it's one way to help orient. But even to use that, you need more humility than we have today. And that's really where the problem comes in. Because, and I often tell people, look, when people say they want freedom right now, just think about this. Say, is what they're saying that they want freedom, the freedom from constraint and consequence? Because I think in all cases, that's what they are actually saying. And I think if you listen, you'll hear that. No. I want freedom from constraint and consequence. That's what they want freedom from. And then why? Well, because to your point, they've been brought up in the rich household on the trust from the trust of Christendom, and they just have never had any friction.
Did you this is probably 2 years back, but one of the Peterson podcast episodes that just totally stuck in my head was he had this conversation with a British psychologist who worked in like the London hospital and the prison system or something. Like this guy's like, he's doing psychotherapy with like people who are having a really rough time. And they were talking about not getting married, basically. Like the idea that like you could just like have these open relationships and like you don't need to get married and just, go for it. And they traced this line from, it got really popular with these like upper middle class and upper class people in society who are the children of stable families. And so then they're going off and having these romantic relationships, and children are being born from it, or they have the money to buy contraceptives and the forethought to use contraceptives because they don't want to have children. And it works out fine because they've got all this stability and they've got all these resources and they've got all these people around them that are acting appropriately. And then that gets portrayed in television shows because it's glitzy and glamorous. And then the people at the bottom of society start doing it. And like the guy's point, the psychologist's point was like, it's just hell. Like, it's just hell. And he spends about 30 minutes to an hour describing exactly all of the twisted ways that femininity and masculinity come out when you do this. And it's terrible. He's like, basically the women are all abused and they have a bunch of children they can't support. And the men are also jealous that they're really violent to each other and that male aggression is like spiked to the max, and like temperance and prudence are nowhere rewarded. And so there's this, that's the thing. It's like when you're safe and you're protected, you've got all these resources, you feel like it's okay to like not be disciplined, to not order your appetites, et cetera, et cetera. You work your way out a little bit of that. And then all of a sudden, and so this is why consequentialism sucks, because
But it was okay.
Because it was okay.
Okay.
You can run a couple of generations like that, and you're like, you might get 2 generations where they look at it like, hey, we've been nothing bad's happened. This has
Working
all been
out
great
fine.
so far.
Yep. Well, and that's because again, we don't understand scale. I mean, this is
Yes.
you know, this egregore thing. It's really important. So when you hear, like when you heard the Vervaeke and Pageau talk about this concept of higher order consciousness basically, and Vervaeke kind of foolishly, actually, I was shocked. He said, the city doesn't talk back to you. And Pageau's like, dude, the city can send you a letter. And like, it really stumped John because he was like, oh, the city does talk. Of course the city talks back to me. Have you ever gone to town hall, John, and done anything at all? Or dealt with, I don't know, getting mysterious parking tickets on your car when you were legally parked and then having that car stolen from you by the city, by the way. This might be a personal story. And then having to try to get it back from these bastards who basically broke the rules. Like,
Hey, leave their mothers out of this, all right?
No,
That's right. Attaboy.
No,
Yeah.
I will
no,
not.
or don't mow your lawn for long enough in the summer, and the city will start talking to you about
right.
it.
And, well, and that's the thing. The city does talk back, but the thing that people don't realize is that yes, the form of communication takes longer.
Yeah.
And as you scale up across generations, the effects of the things you did, say in the 60s or in the 50s, or as a result of the Protestant rebellion, begin to take hold in the world. It just takes a long time, and it takes a lot longer than you think, because to your point about consequentialism, it's not immediate. It's not this discrete linear relationship. I do this and this happens, right?
Yeah.
It's not that anymore. We have a whole side of our brain that deals with that, and that's good, and we need that absolutely 100%. And that's the realm of logic, reason, and rationality. Okay. But you know what? That's not half the world. Most of the world, and the most important part is the rest of it, which is maybe faith, love, and hope, or something like that. I don't know. I haven't thought enough about it.
Wisdom.
I'm not a theologian.
Maybe.
Wisdom. Well, wisdom's wrapped up in that, right? Because when knowledge fails you, and it has failed us, like we have all the knowledge of the world, actually, or as close to it as you could possibly even conceive of, yet everything's worse. This is the part people miss. And yet everything is not the same. It's actually, and we know this, we blame Facebook, we blame Google, we blame YouTube, we blame all these things, right? And somewhat correctly. Now people are like at the edge of knowledge or gnosis. Maybe they're seeing the limits of the age of gnosis, which I think is better framing. See my Twitter feed. And then all of a sudden, wisdom is the answer. And I don't disagree, but nobody has a good definition of wisdom, in my opinion. And that's the sort of stuff I'm working on, a definition of wisdom.
All right.
So my podcast, Ted. I'm thinking about our inability to comprehend spiritual effects in the world, especially at scale and in time. And I'm thinking, well, how would a good and loving God communicate that to you? And what I think that good and loving God has to say is that if you have sex before marriage, you're going to hell. Now, maybe you'll have time to repent, but if you roll those dice enough, even if we strip all of the supernatural out of it, we strip all of the last things out of it, and we just look at that from a purely naturalistic frame, we should actually be able to say that if you have sex before marriage, somebody's going to hell.
Yeah.
Right. But the other side of that, though, I think the other side's more significant. And what it would look like, we'll say, in the way Peterson talks about it, in Jungian terms, is synchronicity. Right?
I don't know what
like
that is.
the things that come up that are just strange. Like, well, wow, why did this happen? Why did these two events coincide and form something that I didn't expect that was wonderful? Right? Because you got to have the positive and the negative side.
Yeah,
Synchronicity is an album by The Police.
Also,
Father Eric, what you were saying is I'm thinking back to early Jordan Peterson, right? That's what he was saying about what the Bible was saying, right? Like very much in line with exactly that. It's if you can't believe in a supernatural hell and a supernatural heaven, at least realize that this is still like it's still true.
Still works.
It still works. It works on like on all these different levels. Okay, so Mark, I've got and Father Eric, there's a Catholic professor named Dr. John Kudebeck, who I've met several times. He's just a wonderful man, and he's like, you meet him, you're like, oh, like you're a philosopher, like you're actually a philosopher. Like when you listen to him talk, he's just like, he's not like a teacher, he's a philosopher. And you think, I mean, and he's not, mostly his philosophy is of the home, of the household, right? So he's not concerned with like grand systems, but like he is like a man with a tremendous amount of wisdom that he brings. And so he's done this with his various words, like leisure, the way he brings forward leisure. It's just like what leisure is. Any rate, but he had a definition of wisdom. So this is actually really interesting. He says that the fundamental work project of the human household is the cultivation of wisdom. That is the primary work of a household, is the cultivation of wisdom. So then he offers a definition of wisdom, and he offered a definition of wisdom in that talk, which is, let me see if I can get this right. It is to see the highest principles and know how they relate to the particulars.
Thank
I liked that.
That's correct.
I was like,
Correct.
man, that's really good.
That's exactly it. I mean, that's exactly how people use it.
Yeah, to see the highest principles and to see how they relate to the particulars. I was like, yeah,
Right.
man.
Well, I would add in the moment, because the
yes,
the
yeah, that's what I
problem
mean.
Right,
Yeah.
but that's always the problem. See, in the age of gnosis frame, they'll
Yeah.
compress it or flatten it or reduce it, right?
No,
and
no.
they'll go, oh, okay, the particulars, and they'll turn that into an abstract like the principles and say, okay, so there's a correspondence there, so there's a formula that you can apply, and it's like, no, right? The whole point is, for example, knowing which Bible verse to reference based on your struggle. There you go. That would require wisdom.
That's the temptation. That's the temptation in the wilderness. That's our Lord's temptation in the wilderness. It's like, look, you can't, if you want to know how critical that is, recognize that Satan quotes scripture. It's like, now you get the problem. Satan quotes scripture to tempt Jesus Christ. It's like our Lord Jesus Christ. It's like, now you've seen the problem. It's like, let's work on wisdom, because it's not just enough. Even you could even go to the Holy Scriptures, and here it is. And if you misapply it, it's like,
if you misapply it, right? Well, and it's right application.
Yes, that's right. And look, the one thing that I remember from my philosophy class, besides my zany Bostonian professor who I loved and was like one of the weirdest men I've ever met.
It's always good to have the zany Bostonian around.
Oh, it's just fantastic. He at one point he actually tried to light a student's hand on fire. It was when we were I can't remember which of the like early Enlightenment philosophers who was talking about like the difference between different kinds of perceptions. He's like, yeah, there's like the light and the heat, and he's like trying to stick this lit lighter under a kid's hand, and the kid's like, "What are you doing?" At any rate, the one other thing I remember from that was we went through whichever of Plato's works it is, dealing with primarily with what is wisdom, and in the end, the answer was something like, "Wisdom is the gods telling you what's right to do in each moment." And I was like, oh. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And Vervaeke brought this up too at Chino, and it was wonderful. He's like, we're always trying to condense wisdom down into rules, and it never works.
Right.
And Eliot wrote about this too, right? Where's the wisdom we've lost in knowledge? Where's the knowledge we've lost in information? Right? It's that same cry. You can't. They're not equivalent. You're doing completely different things.
What you just need to do is build a big enough neural network.
Right. Go.
Taller tower, Ed. Come on, Ted. Taller tower. It just needs to be higher.
Yeah, just a little bit more, and we can jump that. We can go from quantitative to qualitative. We'll do it.
Just give me one more chance. Just give me one more neural net.
Just
give me a little bit more information and a little bit of time to try. I promise. This time I'll actually build a utopia. It's gonna work this time.
I'll form you a few more petaflops. Just a couple more petaflops, and we'll be good.
Oh goodness.
Yeah. No, it's exact. I mean, it's exactly that. That is that's the thing. Like that's the whole project. And yeah, but the wonderful thing is that like when people are wise, right? This whole like anti-consequentialist notion that I'm trying to get out is like the wonderful thing about that is you can be wise, act wisely your whole life and not see any outcome from it, and also just not worry about it.
Right.
Because if you did that, you did more good than you can understand. It's like, there you go. Just be wise, pursue wisdom, and leave. You don't have to see anything come from it.
I mean, you can just look back at good things that have happened in your life and see just how little the seed was that made that happen.
Yeah.
So 100%.
Yeah.
A reason that I am a priest today, and so far have been founding it to be a very lovely and enjoyable way to serve God, even with its crosses, is the fact that when we lived in Norway, Father Rolf assigned Father Radar to retrain the altar servers, and Father Radar had us do very reverent high liturgy as much as we could manage. It's like that kind of exemplification that made a big impact on 10-year-old Eric, right? Being up there, just I love the smoke, man. They got the sensor going every week. I love the smoke. I thought that was the best thing in the world. I'd never seen it before. It's like Father Radar is like, we're gonna do it. Father Rolf, he was just like, yeah, that's fine. I'll do it. That's cool. And now I'm a priest, right? And like, golly, how many absolutions have I done already, releasing people from their sins? How many times have I been able to offer the Eucharist already? And it just, and it's like, maybe I've already inspired a 10-year-old lad with a vocation to the priesthood that'll flower in another 20 years. I don't know. And like, if Father Radar look at me and say, oh yeah, if we do incense every Sunday, that kid right there is going to become a priest, because I've done all the calculations and he matches up everything exactly. I have calculated this now.
No, because he didn't have an AI, so we know that didn't happen.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they just didn't have enough petaflops,
Oh my God.
They were still on the Pentium 3 processor in those days. They couldn't have possibly been wise.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. It's just easier that way in some well, okay, so this is a thing that's come up with a friend of mine a lot recently. And what's interesting is apparently the sermon at his church, the homily at his church today was exactly this. I think that we've been doing this project. This actually ties in with so much of the stuff we've been talking about. The modern project notion is that life should not be hard. And so it ends up being incredibly complicated. Like, if you want to avoid things being hard, things necessarily end up getting incredibly complicated. And so there's this, like, I think that life, in terms of wisdom, in some sense, wisdom is a lot more simple and a lot more difficult than people are ready to accept. Like, right. I think that's what I've been wrestling with. So, and actually that really helps me understand the mind-boggling complexity of the world today, right? Because most of that complexity is the outgrowth of trying to deal with hard things. So if you want to get around, right? I mean, like, it's, well, look, I mean, a really simple example of this is if we were willing to accept the hardship of people dying from autonomous vehicles, we would have had that. We had that problem solved like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. We could have dealt with the hardship of people dying because of autonomous vehicles, and everyone could have had an autonomous car 20 years ago, but we won't. And then what do you end up doing? You end up having to get that 0.9 out. It's like 0.99, 0.9999, and it's like, how much more complicated does it get every time you try to take an order of magnitude out of there? And it's like,
well, and that's one of the themes in the Matrix movies.
Yeah.
Second Matrix movie, that it's explicit. Yeah, you're the remainder of an unbalanced equation. Right. You're the remainder of an unbalanced equation. That's who the one is, technically. According to the second Matrix movie, that Neo is the remainder of an unbalanced equation. That's all he is. You're special because you can't. Oh, yeah. Oh, dude. If Jesse and I ever get around to doing the Matrix breakdown we want to do, oh, yeah, you're going to be blown away by all the weirdness in that. and especially in the trilogy overall, you really need the trilogy. People don't like 2 and 3. Actually, I think it's a crime to watch just the first one, because it's just, the first movie is full of philosophical questions, and the second movie has less than half as many, but they're deeper. And the third movie has less than half as many as the second, but they're way deeper. It's all wrong, but that's a different problem. The way they resolve everything is completely backwards. The messages they're telling you are not what you think. And yeah, but it is that you're right. And it's when you're running away from struggle, right? Just to tie it back to what we were saying earlier, when you're running away from struggle or suffering, I like struggle better. I'm going to struggle with you guys about this. You complexify the world, and you get more struggle at the end, and you don't see it coming.
Yeah.
Totally. And that's Dante, right? You don't see how flattening the world now is going to make the world real flat for you for eternity later when you get tied down to it.
So I'm going to try and come up with an example for this. Let's say that, but I don't have enough technical skill for it. But like, let's say in the kitchen, if you got really good with a knife, you could do all sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
Or you could buy 30 different kitchen gadgets to get exactly the cuts that you need.
Yes.
And so you decide you're going to go for the 30 different kitchen gadgets, but they're constantly breaking. They aren't working properly. They don't provide as quality of a product, and your kitchen is all cluttered up. And I'm imagining there's a computer programming analogy in there that if I knew more about, it's like being able to code something really well in C versus
it's AI.
I thought, I don't know.
No, right now in AI, the bottom line is you can ask it to write you even a script. It's very good at writing scripts. Actually, AI is great for scripting work. Not good for any kind of programming. It's really good at scripting. Like, build me a program that does a simple set of things that's basically sequential. It's very good at that. However, if that reaches a certain level of complexity, I've done a lot of research on this, guys. A lot. Hundreds of hours at this point, unfortunately for me. If it reaches a certain level of complexity, the time it takes you to fix it is actually longer than it would take you to write it from scratch. That's already in AI, right? You've already got a case in AI. It's already there. You've already got a case in AI where to make it useful, you need a model, and then you need lang chain, and then you need, right? So you already need like 7 or 8 really hard to configure tools, and then you need to tune those tools, and then you can crank out something that's really efficient, right? But to get to that efficiency point, it's already at the point where it takes too much work, and it's so bad now. The thing that I struggled with all day today was I was like, hey, I'm trying to get these AI. I'm trying to get a downloadable AI that's not online to work locally, and I have all this hardware. And one of my machines is down. I'm like, wow, I've got this super laptop. The laptop can do it. So I downloaded 3 different pieces of software that are supposed to run on Windows 11, download a model, and allow you to train it. None of them were able to. They have like, which model do you want? You hit the download button. None of them were able to do the download part of that process. 0 out of 3. And I was like, what world am I living in when you literally can't download a file? And that's literally all they're doing. They're downloading a file. I know where they're downloading it from. I could download it manually. But now, because I'm running that program with that framework, I can't download it manually, because if I do it, the program doesn't know that I did it. It doesn't have that information. So I can't even fix it easily, because we've complexified things so much that even though I know exactly what it's doing and how to do it manually, that won't fix the program anymore. And I'm just like, oh, this is a horrible situation.
This is what happens when you've got dumb tools that are almost. It's the Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
you can't get the brooms to stop bringing up the buckets of water.
Right. Well, this is really interesting too, because I'm thinking about like vehicle, like mechanical work, right, on vehicles, right? Cars now, objectively, they run better. Like, it takes longer before they break down. But like, you go try to fix like a Toyota RAV4 plug-in hybrid.
No.
Like, you can't even get in. Like, you lift the hood up and it's like, wow, okay. Versus like, I'm a numbskull. And back when I had a 1985 F250, I replaced the starter on that thing. I replaced all sorts of other stuff on it because it's big and it's dumb and it breaks frequently. But I can just get in there and so the notion of like we've got to make a car that never breaks. It's like, well, it's gonna break, and then when it breaks, it's like, nope, you can't fix it. I can't fix it. We got to go take it to this tech, and it's like, so there's this weird. It's that same thing going on over and over and over, and I'm worried that like civilization is doing this completely.
Oh yeah. Oh no, it is, and it's worse than that with cars. Cars is something I know pretty well too, actually. Right now, if you go in with a scan tool, and very sophisticated scan tools now, the ODB system that they use is amazing, right? The problem is that it often misreports because it turns out that a bad oxygen sensor can be caused by a bunch of other things and show up as a bad oxygen sensor. So you can't look at the tool, swap the oxygen sensor, and have any, expectation of success. And you actually just have to have experience in trying to fix these things to know whether or not
wins
it's
again.
an oxygen sensor. Even though the computer tells you it's definitely the oxygen sensor.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily true. There can be a small hole just before the oxygen sensor. That'll throw the oxygen sensor off. And unless you know on that car model that they made a particularly bad exhaust or it was under stress or something and it cracks form, you won't know that on that model when it says oxygen sensor, it never means oxygen sensor.
Which is wisdom, Mark. If you have the wisdom to fix the car, then you can do it. But if you don't have the wisdom,
when I think by and large, wisdom is experiential. Vervaeke would go into participatory knowledge. I think that's a bad frame, but it's experiential.
The Aquinas actually links sapientia with sapere, which means to taste.
Yeah,
I got you both to hum at the same time.
Yes.
That was cool.
Yeah. Well, and Spanish still, Father Eric, Spanish still has that as a child of Latin. Saber is to know and to taste, which is like weird. Yeah. Speaking of eating,
that's a form of knowledge, experience.
Yes. Well, but there's this. I would add to wisdom primarily being experiential. In that case, I would say that good narrative is like a form of experience, because narrative can cultivate wisdom in a way that nothing else can. I think the Spanish have two no's. Yes, it does. Yeah, Emma, it has saber and conocer. We actually had I think when I was running this summer, we had a long conversation about this one live stream this summer. There is some interesting stuff in there. But
I think narrative in particular, right? And this is why I like my my video on the types of knowledge, where there's actually only two, but long story. Right. See that video on navigating patterns. Because what we're really talking about is the difference between understanding the discrete linear connections versus the difference of understanding the more poetic connections, which are multivariate and multi-connected and interconnected, right? Yeah. Where don't pull on that, you don't know what it's attached to, right? Actually matters.
See me and Father Eric and Dr. Jim presenting in Arkansas in November. So link in the description.
Yes, link is in the description. You hosers, you come out and you listen to us talk if you like this. Because it'll be better in real life. Because of an experience. We can't experience each other quite properly over these feeble connecting devices.
We're so flattened. This is the flat world right here.
This is the flattening of Mark Lefebvre. Look at how flat he is. He's just in a box.
Father Eric, you could speak to it directly. Difference between hanging out with me in person and hanging out with me online. You can speak to that being different for sure.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is.
And you saw that at the conference in DC, because Nate, who I had never met before in person, obviously walked right up to me. First time, didn't even say hi. He walked up to me and said, "I understand you. I get you now." I didn't even talk to him yet. Imagine
that's amazing.
In-person thing.
Mark, you're pretty simple. You're just the left-handed monster of the Peterson sphere.
Maybe.
Ooh.
He's just all left hand. He's just all left hand.
I want a sweet title like that. I'm trying not to be jealous over here, Mark.
Okay. I gotta hang out with you more, and then I'll come up with something.
This is interesting. I wonder if lack of functionality can be related to the meaning crisis. I would say
Yes.
absolutely, because functionality is about final cause. Functionality is final cause. And if you want to resolve the meaning crisis, you must have final causes. So I would say it can be stated even more precisely. The functionality of humans, forgetting what the functionality of humans is the root of the meaning crisis. If you can figure out what humans are for, you've solved the meaning crisis.
Ted,
Or
who created you?
Who created me? God created me. And you
Why
know what?
did
My
God
2-year-old
create you?
son. Oh, hold on. To serve him and enjoy him in this life and the next.
To know God, to
Know
love
God,
him,
love him.
and to serve him in this life, so that we can be with him forever in the next.
Okay, I totally compressed that. Thank you.
Yeah, you
But-
got to know him first. It's important.
Yes. Very
But
important.
that is, the quote end of modernity, which I hate. The end of materiality
Yes.
is the meaning crisis. The meaning crisis is realizing the material frame you've been using for your life
Yep.
is insufficient and doesn't explain any of the things that you need explained in order to live.
Yeah. Yes. And then, which another way of translating that, Mark, is to say that we have all woken up to the insufficiency of only having two forms of causality, and we realize there's two other kinds.
Yes. or having one form of causality that is wrapped up into definitions.
That's right. Yeah. So that's a really great thing. And I think that I would actually propose that part of the reason that sort of in the thick of the material technical world that function, everyone's all about function, is because it ends up being the basically like downgraded fake final cause.
That's all you have. All you have is function. Yeah, when you compress final cause, you get function, right?
That's right.
When you compress this multivariate equation, you get discrete, single variate linear connections. And look, science is excellent at that. But I've actually said this before. I think that we are at the end of science. Like literally all the low-hanging fruit is gone. And science, just because it's all multivariate from here on out, or almost all multivariate from here on out, that science is all done. Like it's just not going to be doing the stuff it was doing before.
Mark, you ready? You ready to like feel weird? This is what Owen Barfield was writing about. Just like that's his whole thing. His whole thing is like, we're done with the science 1-to-1, and the only way forward is poetry.
Yeah.
And imagination.
That's what he said. He's right.
Yeah. It's like I was when it was some other conversation. Oh, I think it was we haven't I don't think Paul's posted it yet, but the Father Eric and Dr. Jim and I and Paul all
tomorrow that conversation
it's going up tomorrow.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, the whole thing in the back of my head after that conversation was like, oh my goodness, Barfield is right, and it's happening right now. Final participate, like we're watching final participation unfold in front of if anyone's read Saving the Appearances. Final participation is like we're actually like watching it. Everyone wake up to the fact that, oh my goodness, we need this.
So let me see if I know enough Barfield 101 to maybe get our 6 viewers in on this. The world and humanity starts off with naive participation, where you just, there's the world and here it all is and it's all beautiful and I'm just acting and everything just kind of flows intuitively without us having to explain it. And then materialism starts creeping in like the 8th century in the West, in case you guys thinking it's all wrapped up with todayness. And we start disconnecting spirit from matter. We start disconnecting final causality and formal causality from the world. And we start breaking things up into small pieces instead of seeing the entire whole together. And so remind me what that stage is called?
He calls it idolatry.
Idolatry. Oh,
yeah.
Woof. Ouch.
Yes.
Yeah. But then, it's like that fever can only burn for so long, and we return to final participation, but it's no longer naive.
That's exactly it. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's Barfield 101 for you. You're all experts now.
What's so fun is that you go and then you pick up Barfield and you're like, oh, what am I reading?
What language was this? This was written in English? What?
Always. What's so funny is, and I was talking about this with Sherry at some point, just we're having a conversation. This isn't anywhere in particular, but I mean, Barfield he dearly loved poetry. He was not a poetic man. When you read his writing, it's like his writing is so dry. He like adores poetry. He probably thinks too highly of poetry. And then you read it and you're like, yeah, man, like, it's just funny. He just writes like a lawyer. He was a lawyer, like professionally, he was a lawyer, and he just writes like he's writing legal briefs. And you're like, it's such an irony. It's really, I don't know. I love it. It's like, he is, what is like a lactose intolerant cheesemaker. That's basically, he's like, there's this thing and he can't have it and he wants it and he does it and he loves it, but it just won't come out of him.
Well, that's why he had to read it, because it wasn't going to come out of him.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. Yeah, I've also dabbled in his book Poetic Diction, and there's some interesting stuff he's got in there too. He was brilliant. He was weird and brilliant, and underrated. Sherry, I hope you hear this at some point and hear me. She thinks I'm too hard on Barfield most of the time. Yeah. Well, gentlemen, this has been wonderful.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah. I got like 2 hours of TED tonight. That's 2 thumbs up.
Yeah, it was great work. Well, it's been nice. I had absolutely crazy work for like 2.5 weeks, and then I'm in this like gap between, and it's gonna get crazy again because my next job is work until the rains come, because it's in the bottoms, and like most of the area I'm working in is actually a lake for half of the year. And so when the machine gets out there on like Monday or Tuesday, it's like no stopping until the rains come. So when I can jump in and get it, I really want to. So
that was great.
Alrighty. Mark, any final thoughts?
No, I mean, this is 2 weeks in a row of awesome open mic that I have to tell everybody to watch, because that's amazing.
Appreciate the shout out on Friday. Ted,
Yeah, you'll get another one. Don't worry.
Yeah. Okay.
What was that, Father?
Any closing thoughts?
Oh, yeah. Be wise, and as much as God grants you the grace, see your sufferings and struggles as His grace.
Alrighty. I will end here with a quote from St. Pius of Pietrelcina. Pray, hope, and don't worry.
I love Padre Pio. Say Padre Pio.
And God bless you all. Good night.